On a remote, wild beach, a wealthy man arrives with his 3 little daughters, 3-year-old triplets, promising them a special outing by the sea. The girls, enchanted by the sunshine and the promise of adventure, have no idea that this day will change their lives forever. The man builds a makeshift raft, seats the girls side by side, and with a cold smile tells them they'll play pirates sailing the sea. Before they can understand, he pushes the raft out into the water away from the shore. The girls, still smiling, soon realize they can't paddle back. Their father, without looking back, calmly walks away along the sand, leaving the children adrift. That's when a white horse, belonging to a lonely fisherman, witnesses the scene and makes a decision that will change everything. Before we begin, if you, like us, love animals, subscribe now so you don't miss any moving stories. Thank you. Let's get back to our story. The salty wind cut at their faces like invisible blades as the luxury sedan navigated the dusty road leading to the secluded beach. In the back seat, 3 identical little girls, just 3 years old, dangled their legs, their eyes shining with expectation. Anna, Bea, and Clara were like 3 little angels with golden curls that danced in the breeze from the open window and smiles that could light up any room. "Daddy, are we at the ocean yet?" asked Anna, the most talkative of the 3, clutching a worn-out rag doll to her chest. "Soon, princess," the man at the wheel responded, adjusting the rear-view mirror to watch his daughters. His eyes, however, did not reflect the affection his words tried to convey. Richard Ashford, a successful 42-year-old businessman, was wearing an expensive suit, even for this special outing, and his manicured hands gripped the steering wheel with attention. That contrasted with the soft tone of his voice. Bea, always the most observant, noticed something strange in her father's expression in the mirror. "Is Daddy sad?" she asked, tilting her head with the pure curiosity only a small child possesses. "Of course not, sweetheart. Daddy is very happy to be with you," Richard lied, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The truth was that every word cost him immense effort. Every glance at the girls in the mirror tightened his chest like a closed fist. Clara, the quietest, simply watched the landscape through the window, fascinated by the gulls circling overhead. She didn't say much, but her blue eyes captured every detail of the world around her. When she saw the ocean for the first time that day, she clapped her hands and shouted, "Big water! Big water!" The sound of his daughter's joy echoed in the car like a silent accusation. Richard swallowed hard, remembering the venomous words of Veronica, his new wife, the night before. "You need to choose, Richard. It's either our family or those complications from your past. I can't keep pretending they don't exist." The beach appeared before them like a wild and majestic scene. The waves crashed forcefully on the dark, coarse sand, creating a constant symphony that mixed with the cries of the gulls. It was an isolated place where people rarely came, especially on a weekday like this. "We're here!" Richard announced, stopping the car near a path that led down to the sand. His heart was pounding, but his voice maintained the same feigned cheerfulness. The triplets scrambled out of the car with the typical energy of small children, running towards the beach with squeals of delight. Anna tripped in the soft sand and fell, but got up quickly, laughing loudly. Bea helped her brush the sand off her clothes, while Clara had already positioned herself at the water's edge, watching the waves with admiration. "Careful, girls! Don't get too close to the water," Richard called out, carrying a bag he had taken from the trunk. Inside were pieces of wood, ropes, and a few empty plastic jugs, materials he had carefully prepared for this moment. While the girls played, Richard began to assemble a makeshift raft with mechanical movements, as if it were just another task from the office. His hands trembled slightly, but he forced himself to continue. The sea breeze carried his daughter's laughter to him, and each sound was like a stab to his conscience. "Daddy, what are you making?" asked Anna, approaching with curiosity. "I'm preparing a very special surprise for you three," he replied, not looking up from the raft. "You're going to play pirates sailing the high seas." The girls clapped their hands, ecstatic at the idea, never imagining that these would be the last kind words they would hear from their father. The raft took shape under Richard's trembling hands as he tied the timbers with a mechanical precision that belied the turmoil in his chest. The three girls watched, fascinated, sitting in a semicircle on the sand like a small audience awaiting a magical show. "Will it really float, Daddy?" Bea asked, gently touching one of the logs with her little finger. Her eyes shone with the absolute trust that only a 3-year-old can have in her father. "It will, my angel. It will float like a real boat," Richard answered, his voice hoarse, betraying the emotion he tried to hide. He secured the empty jugs to the raft's base, ensuring it would float, at least for a while. Anna stood up and began to dance around the makeshift construction, humming a made-up song. Little boat goes on the blue sea." Her joy was contagious, and soon Bea and Clara joined her, twirling and laughing on the warm sand. The sound of the waves seemed louder now, as if the sea itself sensed what was to come. Richard looked at the horizon, where the infinite blue met the overcast sky. There wasn't another soul on the deserted beach, only the gulls that flew in circles, crying out their wild warnings. "Done!" he announced, standing up and wiping his hands on his pants. The raft was there, simple but functional, rocking slightly in the breeze. "Who wants to be the first pirate to sail the 7 seas? Me, me!" the three shouted at once, running towards the makeshift vessel. Clara stumbled in her haste, and Richard caught her, feeling the small, fragile weight of his daughter in his arms. For a moment their eyes met, and she smiled with such purity that he almost changed his mind. Almost. "Easy, my princesses. You'll all go together like a real crew," he said, helping them sit side by side on the raft. Anna on the left, ever the talker. Bea in the middle, observant and careful, and Clara on the right, quiet but attentive to everything. The girls clung to each other, laughing and rocking with the gentle movement of the wood on the wet sand. They couldn't swim, they were too small, but they trusted their father completely. This blind trust was both their innocence and their condemnation. "Daddy's going to push the boat into the water, and you'll go on an incredible journey," Richard explained, his voice growing more tense. He glanced once more at the empty road behind him, making sure they were still alone. "Are you coming with us, Daddy?" asked Anna, holding out her small hand to him. "No, my princess. Daddy will stay on the beach watching you sail. That's how it works. Pirates go on adventures by themselves," he lied, refusing to take his daughter's outstretched hand. Bea frowned, sensing something strange in her father's tone. "But what if we get lost in the big ocean?" "You won't get lost. You're brave pirates, remember?" Richard began to push the raft toward the water, his muscles tensing from the effort and the emotion. The sand gave way under his feet, and the sound of the waves grew as they neared the waterline. The first waves lapped at the base of the raft, and the girls shrieked with joy, thinking it was all a great game. The cold water wet their little feet, making them laugh even louder. They didn't understand they were being carried away from safety, away from everything they knew. "Look, the boat is moving," exclaimed Clara, speaking more than she usually did, excited by the novelty. The raft was now fully in the water, bobbing with the small waves at the edge. Richard pushed a little harder, and it began to drift away from the shore, carried by the natural current. The girls waved at him, still thinking it was part of the game. "Bye, Daddy, bye," they shouted in chorus, their small voices struggling against the sound of the sea. Richard stood on the wet sand, watching the raft slowly drift away. His daughters kept waving, their faces lit up with smiles, not realizing that each wave was taking them further from home. The wind carried their laughter to him, each sound a torture to his already shattered conscience. He stood there for long, Minutes until the girls' figures became just small dots in the vast blue expanse. Then, without looking back, he walked with heavy steps back to his car, leaving only footprints in the sand that the tide would soon erase. A few miles away, in a simple wooden cabin faded by salt and time, John Miller was finishing mending his nets with the patience of a man who had learned the sea does not forgive haste. His 65 years were etched on his sun-weathered face and in the calloused hands from decades of pulling fish from the ocean. A widower for 10 years, he had found a peculiar but not unwelcome companionship in solitude. Beside him, a medium-sized but muscular and strong white horse watched the horizon with almost human attention. Storm, as John had named him when he found him injured on the beach years ago, possessed a rare intelligence and an inexplicable connection to the sea. The animal helped the fishermen carry the nets, pull the boat across the sand, and most importantly, seemed to sense when something wasn't right. "Another day's work, Storm," John murmured, stroking the horse's neck. "The sea's restless today. You feel it too." The horse neighed softly, as if in agreement, his ears twitching constantly, picking up sounds the human ear couldn't perceive. There was something in the air that made him agitated, a premonition that made his muscles contract with tension. John was preparing for another day of fishing when the distant sound of an engine reached them. It was odd. Few cars visited this isolated region, especially on a weekday. The fisherman raised his eyes, shielding them from the sun with his hand, and saw a luxury vehicle coming down the path to the beach further north. Lost tourists, he thought, turning his attention back to his nets. But Storm couldn't settle. Down, the horse paced in small circles, neighing softly, his eyes fixed in the direction the engine sound had come from. About an hour later, the same car passed by on the road back, this time at a much higher speed. John noticed that now there was only one person in the vehicle, the driver. Strange. Families with small children usually spent more time at the beach, especially on a beautiful day like this. Storm, however, did not calm down with the car's departure. On the contrary, he grew even more agitated. He began to trot towards the beach, stopping every few feet to look back at John, as if trying to communicate something urgent. "What is it, old boy? What's bothering you so much?" John frowned, watching the animal's strange behavior. In all the years they had lived together, he had learned to trust the horse's instincts. Storm never got agitated for no reason. Then the wind brought a different sound, not the constant roar of the waves, nor the familiar cry of the gulls. It was something higher, more human. John stopped working and listened, trying to identify what he had heard. Storm reared, neighing, loudly this time, and began to gallop toward the beach. John dropped his nets and ran after the horse, his heart starting to beat faster. Something was wrong, very wrong. As they neared the waterline, the sound became clearer. They were voices, children's voices, crying. John reached the edge of the beach and scanned the horizon with the experienced eyes of someone who knew the sea's every move. There, a considerable distance from the coast, a small makeshift vessel was bobbing on the waves, and on it, 3 tiny figures clung to each other. "My God," he whispered, unable to believe what he was seeing. "They're children alone at sea." Storm was already in the water, muscles tense and nostrils flared. The horse looked at John once, as if asking for permission, and then plunged into the waves without hesitation. John shouted the horse's name, but it was too late. Storm was swimming with determination toward the raft, fighting the current that tried to pull him away from the shore. The fisherman ran to his rowboat, pushing it quickly into the water, but he knew the horse was a faster swimmer. On the raft, the 3 girls had stopped finding the game amusing. At first, they had laughed and sung, thinking it was part of the pirate adventure their father had promised. But now, with the coast getting more distant and the waves growing stronger, fear was beginning to grip their small hearts. "Daddy! "Daddy!" Anna cried, waving desperately at the empty beach. "Come back!" Bea hugged Clara, who was crying softly, and tried to soothe her younger sister. "Don't cry, Clara. Daddy will come get us." But as the minutes passed and the solid ground became just a distant line, even the optimistic Bea began to understand that something terrible had happened. They were alone, on a fragile raft, in the middle of the immense and indifferent ocean. The waves crashed against Storm's body with a force that tested even his exceptional stamina. The white horse cut through the water with powerful movements, his flared nostrils gasping for air with each stroke. His eyes remained fixed on the raft, which was bobbing dangerously about 200 yards from the coast. On the makeshift vessel, panic was beginning to set in. Anna, always the most talkative, had fallen silent and was clinging tightly to her sisters. Bea tried to stay calm, but her little hands trembled as she held Clara, who was sobbing softly, repeating, "I want Mommy," between cries. "Look, look there!" Bea suddenly shouted, pointing to the white shape approaching in the water. "It's a horse! A swimming horse!" The three girls turned to see the extraordinary animal fighting the waves to reach them. Storm neighed from time to time, a sound that echoed over the water like a call of hope. "Is he coming to save us?" asked Clara, stopping her crying for a moment, fascinated by the sight of the horse that seemed to fly over the waves. Storm reached the raft, panting but determined. Carefully he placed his muzzle against the side of the vessel and began to push it toward the shore. The girls, initially frightened by the proximity of the large animal, soon realized his intentions. "Pretty horse! Hero horse!" exclaimed Anna, reaching out her small hand to touch Storm's wet muzzle. The animal accepted the caress, neighing softly as if to reassure the children. Meanwhile, John rowed his boat with all the strength his tired arms could muster. He could see Storm pushing the raft, but the current was strong, and progress was slow. With each swell of the waves, the girls cried out, sometimes in fear, sometimes in relief, as they realized they were moving toward land. "Hang on, Storm!" John shouted, still far off. "I'm coming!" The horse's effort was Herculean. His muscles worked beyond their limits, and foam formed around his muzzle from the strain of swimming. But he didn't give up. With every push, the raft moved a few feet closer to safety. Bea, the most observant of the three, noticed the horse was tiring. "He's having trouble," she told her sisters. "He needs to rest." As if he understood her words, Storm stopped pushing for a moment, treading water beside the raft to catch his breath. Clara, moved by a surge of gratitude, leaned over and kissed the animal's muzzle. "Thank you, horsey," she whispered, her tiny voice lost in the noise of the waves. The gesture deeply touched Storm, who seemed to gain new strength. With a vigorous neigh, he resumed the work of pushing the raft, this time with even more determination. John finally reached the group, his rowboat rocking dangerously in the rougher waves. "Girls, stay calm! I'm taking you to shore!" he shouted, reaching out to grab the first child. "Who are you?" asked Anna, suspicious even in the midst of their desperate situation. "I'm John, the fisherman, and this here is Storm, my partner. We've come to save you," he explained, his gentle voice contrasting with the urgency of the situation. One by one, John transferred the girls from the raft to his rowboat. They clung to each other, shivering from cold and fear, but also from the relief of finally being safe. Storm swam alongside the boat, like an aquatic guardian protecting his most precious treasure. The journey back to shore seemed to take forever. The waves were relentless, and the rowboat rocked dangerously with the added weight of the three children. John rowed with the skill of decades at sea, but his eyes remained worried. The girls were soaked, shivering, and clearly in shock. "Where did you come from? Where are your parents?" he asked during a pause in his rowing. "Daddy brought us to play pirates," Bea answered, her voice trembling. "He said it was a special surprise." "And where is he now?" John pressed, a terrible suspicion beginning to form in his mind. He stayed on the beach. He said pirates go on. Adventures by themselves, Anna explained, not understanding the gravity of her words. John and Storm exchanged a look heavy with understanding. The fisherman had seen many terrible things in his life, but he had never imagined witnessing something as cruel as the deliberate abandonment of 3 innocent children in the middle of the ocean. When they finally reached the beach, John carried the girls one by one to the dry sand, while Storm emerged from the water, shaking his wet mane. The triplets sat together on the sand, still shivering, looking out at the sea as if they couldn't believe they had survived the ordeal. John's cabin was small and simple, but it radiated the warmth of a true home. The faded wooden walls held memories of a life dedicated to the sea, and the smell of salt mixed with fresh coffee created a welcoming atmosphere. The 3 girls entered hesitantly, still shivering with cold, their big eyes observing everything with curiosity and apprehension. "Come on, little ones. We need to get you out of those wet clothes before you catch pneumonia," John said gently, looking in an old trunk for some clothes that could serve temporarily. He found 3 of his own shirts, enormous for the children, but dry and clean. Storm followed the group to the cabin door, where he stood like a sentinel. His ears twitched constantly, alert to any suspicious sound, as if he sensed the danger had not yet completely passed. "I don't want to take my clothes off," whispered Clara, the shyest, hiding behind her sisters. "It's all right, dear. You can change by yourselves behind that curtain. I'll go make something warm for you to eat," John reassured them, hanging an improvised curtain in a corner of the cabin to give the girls privacy. While they changed, John lit the wood-burning stove and began to prepare a simple soup with the few ingredients he had: potatoes, carrots, and a few pieces of fresh fish. The aroma soon filled the small cabin, creating a sense of normalcy amidst the extraordinary situation. "Mr. John," called Bee, appearing from behind the curtain wrapped in the giant shirt that looked like a dress on her. "Can the horse come in? He saved us." John smiled for the first time that day. "Storm prefers to stay outside, but we'll leave the door open so he can see us. He likes to look after people." The 3 sisters sat on the floor on some blankets. John had spread out near the door where they could see the white horse. Anna, always the most communicative, soon began asking questions. "Why do you live alone? Where's your family?" The question touched an old wound in John's heart. He stopped, stirring the soup for a moment, his eyes lost in distant memories. "My family, they went to heaven a long time ago. Now I only have Storm." "Just like us," Clara said softly. "Mommy works far away. We only have Daddy. Had Daddy." The use of the past tense did not go unnoticed by John. These children, so young, had already begun to process the abandonment they had suffered. He served the soup in 3 small bowls he improvised from large mugs and sat on the floor with them. "Now tell me, what are your names and what exactly happened today at the beach?" He asked, his voice gentle but serious. "I'm Anna, she's Bee, and she's Clara. We're triplets," Anna began, pointing to each sister. "Daddy said he was taking us for a special trip to the beach." "He made a raft," continued Bee, blowing on her hot soup. "He said we were going to play pirates sailing the sea. But then he pushed the raft into the water and left," completed Clara, her eyes filling with tears again. "Why did he do that? Did we do something wrong?" The question broke John's heart. He moved closer to Clara and wrapped her in a fatherly embrace. "No, little one, you did nothing wrong. Sometimes adults do things that children can't understand. But now we don't have a daddy anymore," murmured Anna, her voice losing its characteristic cheerfulness. "And Mommy is far away. What's going to happen to us?" John looked at the 3 girls, seeing the fear and confusion on their faces. Storm neighed softly at the door, as if he too were worried about the answer. The fisherman knew he needed to be careful. These children had just gone through a terrible trauma. For now, you'll stay here with me and Storm. Tomorrow, we'll talk to the people in town and figure out how to find your mommy, he said, trying to sound more confident than he actually felt. You're nice, said Clara, snuggling against John's chest. The horse is nice too. As if understanding he was being praised, Storm took a few steps into the cabin and lay down near the girls. Anna and Bee immediately moved closer to the animal, stroking his mane, still damp from the sea. Storm knows you're special, John said, watching the immediate connection between the horse and the children. He never gets this close to strangers. As night fell over the isolated beach, John improvised beds with blankets and pillows for the girls. They cuddled together as they always did, finding comfort in each other's proximity. Storm remained. Nearby, a silent guardian. Mr. John, whispered Bee in the dark, tomorrow can you teach us how to fish? If we're going to stay here, we want to help. The simple question brought tears to the old fisherman's eyes. For years, he hadn't felt needed, had no one to care for or teach. Now, suddenly, 3 little angels had entered his life, bringing purpose and meaning to his lonely days. Richard Ashford's mansion gleamed under the golden lights of the crystal chandelier, but all that opulence couldn't hide the tension hanging in the air. Veronica, his new 28-year-old wife, paced the living room, her high heels echoing. On the polished marble, she was a stunning woman, but her beauty was cold, calculating, and her green eyes reflected a boundless ambition. "Did you do it?" she asked as soon as Richard walked through the door, her voice low but charged with expectation. Richard loosened his tie with hands that still trembled slightly. He had spent the entire drive back rehearsing what he would say, preparing for the lie that would change everything. "It's done," he replied, avoiding his wife's gaze. "Perfect." Veronica approached him, running her fingers along the lapel of his suit. "Now we can finally have the family we've always dreamed of, without complications from the past." Richard pulled away sharply. "Don't talk like that. They were my daughters." "They were bastards from your affair with that housekeeper," Veronica retorted coldly. "Now, you need to think about our future, about the baby we'll be having soon." She placed a hand on her still flat stomach, where a new life was beginning to form. The truth was that Veronica had discovered her pregnancy just a week earlier and had given Richard an ultimatum. Either he got rid of the triplets, or she would disappear with the legitimate heir she carried. For her, there was no room in the life of luxury she had planned for 3 children who would constantly remind everyone of her husband's infidelity. The phone rang, interrupting the tense conversation. Richard answered with a carefully controlled voice. "Hello, Mr. Ashford. This is Detective Evans. We received your call about your missing daughters. I'd like to speak with you in person." Richard swallowed hard. He had made the call to the police during the drive back, playing the part of a desperate father. "Of course, Detective, I can come down to the station right now." Half an hour later, Richard sat in the detective's office, masterfully playing the role of an anguished father. His hands trembled convincingly, and his eyes were red, not from fake tears, but from the tension and guilt consuming him. "Tell me exactly what happened," said Detective Evans, an experienced man who had seen many family tragedies over his career. "I took my 3 daughters for a day at the beach," Richard began, his voice choked with emotion. "They were playing in the sand while I was getting our lunch ready. When I looked again, they were gone. I searched the whole beach, screamed their names until I was hoarse." "How old are the girls?" the detective asked, taking notes. 3 years old. They're triplets, Anna, Bee, and Clara." Richard pulled a photo from his pocket, a recent picture of the 3 smiling girls, which now caused him a physical pain in his chest. "They're very close, always stick together. And their mother? Carmen works in another state for a cleaning company. She doesn't know yet. I didn't have the heart to tell her over the phone. This part was true. Richard really hadn't contacted his ex-partner, but for very different reasons than he claimed. The detective watched Richard carefully. There was something in the man's posture that didn't seem entirely natural, but the pain in his eyes seemed genuine. Mr. Ashford, we'll start the search immediately. I need you to give me all the details. The exact time, the sea conditions, if there were any other people on the beach. For 2 hours, Richard provided meticulously planned information. He knew the area well. He had chosen the beach precisely because it was isolated and managed to create a convincing narrative of a happy family outing turned tragedy in a matter of minutes. When he left the station, Richard found Veronica waiting in the car. "How did it go?" she asked, studying her husband's face. "They're organizing searches by sea and land. They're also contacting the fire department and the Coast Guard," he answered mechanically. "And what if they find the girls?" Veronica's question was loaded with a concern that had nothing to do with the children's well-being. "They won't," Richard said quietly, staring out the window. "That current pulls everything out to the open sea. In a few hours, anything that falls in that water is gone forever." In the following days, Richard played the part of the devastated father with a perfection that impressed even Veronica. He participated in the police-organized searches, handed out photos of the girls, and gave tearful interviews to the local press. Every tear he shed was real, fueled by the guilt that was eating away at his soul. But everyone interpreted it as grief. Over his loss, the local community mobilized. Neighbors who barely knew Richard offered help. Volunteers combed miles of coastline, and local fishermen were questioned about any suspicious sightings. The story of the missing triplets spread quickly, touching hearts throughout the region. "It's a terrible tragedy," commented Mrs. Gable, an elderly neighbor bringing another casserole over to the couple. "3 such little angels. How could something like this happen?" Veronica accepted the condolences with tears in her eyes, perfectly playing the role of the devastated stepmother. "They were so special," she would sigh. "Richard is destroyed. He can barely eat or sleep." Meanwhile, the triplets' real mother, Carmen Rodriguez, was working in a factory 300 miles away, with no idea of the drama unfolding. Richard had told her he was taking the girls for a few days, something that happened regularly. Carmen trusted that her daughters were safe and happy, enjoying time with their father. A week had passed since the rescue, and life in John's cabin had found an unexpectedly harmonious rhythm. The triplets had adapted to the fisherman's simple routine with a facility that surprised even themselves. Anna helped sort the smaller fish from the larger ones. Bea had learned to fold the nets carefully, and Clara had become responsible for brushing Storm's mane every day. "Mr. John, why hasn't anyone come looking for us?" Bea asked that morning as she watched the sea's horizon. The question they had all been afraid to ask had finally been voiced. John stopped mending his net and looked at the 3 girls who had become the light of his days. "My dear, I asked around in town. No one knows about any missing children in this area." "But don't the police look for lost kids?" insisted Anna, her childish curiosity mixed with a growing anxiety. The fisherman sighed deeply. He had struggled with this question all week. He knew he should report the girls' presence to the authorities, but something in his heart stopped him. It wasn't just the fear that they would be taken to a distant foster home. It was the certainty that what had happened on the beach was no accident. "Maybe they're looking in the wrong place," he said carefully. "This beach is very isolated. Few people know it exists." Storm, always attentive to their conversations, approached the girls and began to sniff the air restlessly. His ears twitched constantly, picking up sounds that were still too distant for human ears. "What is it, Storm?" Clara asked, stroking. the horse's neck. "You're nervous again." The sound of engines reached them before they could see the vehicles. 2 black cars were coming down the dusty path to the beach, kicking up clouds of sand that dispersed in the salty wind. John frowned. In all the years he had lived there, he could count on his fingers the times more than one car had visited the area on the same day, and something about the roar of those engines told him they weren't lost tourists. "Girls, get inside the cabin," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. "Quickly." "Why?" asked Anna, but John's serious tone made her obey without further question. The triplets ran into the cabin, followed by Storm, who clearly sensed something was wrong. John walked slowly towards the beach, where the 2 cars had stopped. 4 men got out, all wearing dark suits that were too formal for a hot day at the beach. "Are you the fisherman who lives here?" asked the tallest of them, a man of about 40 with visible scars on his face. "I'm John, yes. How can I help you?" the fisherman replied, keeping a safe distance. "We heard you found some children on the beach recently. 3 little girls," the man continued, his small, cold eyes scanning John's property. The fisherman's heart sped up, but he kept his expression neutral. "I don't know what you're talking about. I find lots of things on the beach, pieces of wood, bottles, sometimes a strange fish." "Don't get smart with us, old man," threatened another of the men, taking a step forward. "We know you have the girls. Our boss wants them back." "Your boss?" John feigned confusion, but a terrible suspicion was starting to form in his mind. "Who's your boss? And why is he looking for children?" "That's none of your business," the first man retorted. "We just need you to hand over the girls. No questions, no problems." Inside the cabin, the triplets watched through a crack in the window, their small hearts pounding. They didn't understand exactly what was happening, but the tension in the air was palpable. "Those men look mean," Clara whispered to her sisters. "Like the bad guys in the stories Mommy used to tell," Bea agreed, hugging her sisters. Storm was restless inside the cabin, his nostrils flared and muscles tense. The horse knew how to recognize danger, and these men exuded a threat that set all his instincts on high alert. Outside, John stood his ground. "Like I said, I don't have any children here. I've lived alone with my horse for years. You can look around if you like." The leader of the men signaled to the others, who began to spread out across the property. One went around the back of the cabin, another examined John's boat, and the third began to search the surrounding area. "Found small footprints in the sand?" one of them shouted after a few minutes. "Definitely from kids." John felt sweat form on his brow. "Lots of families come here on weekends. Those footprints could be from any child. In a place as isolated as this? Don't be ridiculous," the leader snarled. "Last chance, fisherman. Where are the girls?" It was at that moment that Storm made a decision. The horse burst out of the cabin like a force of nature, neighing loudly and rearing up on his hind legs. His eyes shone with a protective fury that made the 4 men instinctively back away. "Damn it! This animal is dangerous!" one of them shouted, trying to pull something from his coat. "Storm, no!" John yelled, running towards the horse, but it was too late. The horse had positioned himself between the men and the cabin, clearly protecting something or someone inside. The leader of the thugs smiled coldly. "Interesting. It seems your horse is more honest than you are, fisherman." The tension in the air was so thick you could cut it with a knife. The 4 men positioned themselves strategically around the cabin, while Storm maintained his defensive stance, neighing low in a threatening tone. John knew he was outnumbered, but there was no way he would hand the girls over to these strangers who clearly had bad intentions. "Look, fisherman," the leader said, trying a different approach. "We don't want any trouble with you. Our boss just wants his daughters back. They ran away from home and he's very worried." "If they're his daughters, why didn't he come himself?" John questioned, buying time while trying to think of a solution. Why send you? He's an important man. He can't waste his time on these things, another of the men said impatiently. Besides, the girls might be scared and not recognize him right away. The explanation was weak, full of holes that confirmed John's suspicions. Inside the cabin, the triplets heard every word, and even at their young age, they could tell something was very wrong. If Daddy wants us back, why did he send mean men? Anna whispered to her sisters. Because he's not our real daddy anymore, Bea replied with a maturity surprising for a 3-year-old. A real daddy doesn't leave his daughters alone in the sea. Just then, the sound of another engine echoed in the distance. An old, noisy truck was coming down the path, kicking up even more dust. To John's relief, it was Manny, the owner of the town's general store, who used to bring supplies to the local fishermen once a week. The 4 men in suits glanced at each other, clearly annoyed by the arrival of a witness. The leader gave a discreet signal to the others, who stepped back slightly from the cabin, trying to appear less threatening. "John, how's it going, old friend?" shouted Manny, getting out of his truck with his usual cheerfulness. "Brought your usual order and a few special things you asked for." Manny was a sturdy man in his 50s, known throughout the area for his honesty and good heart. When he saw the 4 strangers on the property, his expression changed immediately. "We have visitors today?" he asked, approaching John but keeping his eyes on the men in suits. "They were just leaving," John said significantly. "Weren't you, gentlemen?" The leader of the thugs clearly didn't want to cause a scene in front of a witness. "Yes, we were just on our way, but we'll be back to continue our conversation." "What kind of conversation?" asked Manny, his voice laced with suspicion. "You're not from around here. What do you want with John?" "Private business," the man replied coldly, signaling for the others to head to the cars. "In a small town like ours, there's no such thing as private business," Manny retorted, crossing his arms. "We're all neighbors here." Inside the cabin, the girls watched the scene from the window. Clara moved away from the crack and ran to the back of the house, where there was a small hole in the wall with a view of the back of the property. Her childish instinct told her it was better to have a planned escape route. The men got into their cars, but the leader turned one last time to John. "We'll be back, fisherman, and next time you'd better cooperate." The vehicles sped off, kicking up dust, but everyone knew the threat was not empty. Manny waited until they were completely gone before turning to John. "What the devil was that, John? Who were those men?" John sighed deeply. He had known Manny for over 20 years and knew he could trust him. "Manny, I need to tell you something, but you have to promise you'll help me." "Of course, my friend. You know you can count on me." John signaled for the girls to come out of the cabin. The 3 appeared shyly, still wearing the makeshift clothes he had arranged for them. Manny's eyes widened. "Good Lord! Where did these children come from?" "I rescued them from the sea a week ago," John explained quickly. "Someone abandoned them on a makeshift raft. They would have died if Storm hadn't saved them." "Abandoned?" Manny's voice was filled with indignation. "What kind of monster does something like that?" "I don't know, but I suspect it has to do with those men who were here. They said their boss wants the girls back." Manny knelt to be at the triplets' eye level. "Hello, little ones. What are your names?" "Anna," replied the most talkative, still wary. "Bea," said the second, hiding, partly behind her sister. "Clara," whispered the third, clinging to Storm's mane. "And are you safe here with John and Storm?" Manny asked gently. All 3 nodded vigorously. "They saved us," said Bea. "The horse swam in the sea to get us." Manny stood up, his expression determined. "John, you did the right thing by protecting these girls, but you can't face those men alone. What do you suggest?" "I'm going back to town and talking to everyone. In this community, we don't let anyone threaten our neighbors, especially when children are involved. Manny headed for his truck but stopped. And John, the next time those men show up, you won't be alone. As the truck drove away, John felt, for the first time in days, that there might be hope. The girls huddled beside him, and Storm stood, as always, vigilant and protective. "Mr. John," said Anna softly, "are those men really coming back?" "Maybe, my dear. But now we have friends who will help us. And Storm will protect us too, right?" asked Clara, kissing the horse's muzzle. "Always," promised John, watching the horizon where the cars had disappeared. "Always." Carmen Rodriguez glanced once more at the factory clock and sighed. It was Friday night, and it had been exactly 10 days since she had spoken to her daughters. Normally, Richard would update her on the girls at least every other day when they were with him, but this time there was a strange silence that made her uneasy. At 32, Carmen's face bore the marks of a life of constant struggle. She worked double shifts at the textile factory to support the triplets, sending money regularly and visiting them whenever she could. Her separation from Richard had been amicable, at least that's what she believed, and he had always been a present father, even if emotionally distant. "Carmen, are you okay?" asked Lucia, her co-worker, noticing her friend's worried expression. "It's about the girls. I haven't heard from them in over a week. Richard said he was taking them on some outings, but he always kept me informed." "Have you tried calling him?" "Several times. The phone rings, but he doesn't answer. And when he does, he says the girls are sleeping or playing, but won't let me talk to them." Carmen took out her old cell phone and dialed the number again. On the other end, Richard saw Carmen's name on the screen and hesitated before answering. Veronica, watching from the kitchen, motioned for him to answer normally. "Hello, Carmen," he said, forcing cheerfulness into his voice. "Richard, finally. How are the girls? I haven't spoken to them properly in over a week." "They're great. Playing in the yard. You know how they get when they're having fun. They forget about everything else." Carmen frowned. Something in Richard's voice sounded forced, artificial. "Can I talk to them just for a minute? Now's not a good time. They just had lunch and are getting sleepy. How about you call back later?" "Richard, this is weird. A mother feels these things. Something is wrong. Can I come get them?" There was a pause on the other end that was far too long. "Carmen, you're overreacting. The girls are perfectly fine. They're just getting used to the new routine here at the house." "New routine? What new routine?" "Veronica and I thought it would be good for them to spend more time here, to adapt to the family." Richard's voice was growing increasingly tense. "Family? Richard, what are you talking about? The girls have a home, they have a mother. They only stay with you on weekends." "Carmen, we need to talk in person. There are some changes that—" The call was abruptly cut off. Carmen stared at the phone, her heart racing. In the 15 years she had known Richard, she had never seen him act so strangely. There had always been a cordiality between them, especially when it came to their daughters. "Lucia, I need to ask a huge favor. Can you cover my shift tomorrow? I have to go see my daughters." "Of course, Carmen, but is everything okay?" "I don't know. I hope so." The next morning, Carmen took the first bus to Richard's city. The 6-hour journey felt eternal, her heart tight with a premonition she couldn't explain. She had tried calling several times during the night, but Richard's phone was off. When she finally arrived at the mansion, Carmen found the number of cars at the entrance strange. There were at least 4 vehicles she didn't recognize, in addition to Richard's car. She rang the doorbell with trembling hands. Veronica opened the door, wearing a black dress that highlighted her pallor. There were dark circles under her eyes, as if she hadn't slept in days. "Carmen, what a surprise!" Veronica's voice was strange, almost frightened. "Where are my daughters? I want to see them now." Veronica looked nervously behind her, where Carmen could hear men's voices talking in low tones. "Carmen, come in. I need to tell you something." "Tell me what? Where are Anna, Bea, and Clara?" It was then that Richard appeared at the door, accompanied by two men Carmen didn't know. Her ex-partner's face was different, thinner, with a tormented expression she had never seen before. "Carmen," he said, his voice hoarse, "we weren't expecting you so soon." "Richard, where are our daughters? Why are there strangers in your house? Why do you both look like you're at a funeral?" The silence that followed was deafening. Carmen saw Richard and Veronica exchange glances, saw the two men shift uncomfortably, and her heart began to beat so hard she could hear it in her own ears. "Carmen, sit down. Please," Richard said, trying to guide her inside. "No," she shouted, pulling away. "I'm not sitting down until I know where my daughters are. What have you done with them?" "There was an accident," Richard began, the words coming out with difficulty. "What kind of accident? Are they hurt? Are they at the hospital?" "Carmen, the girls," Richard's voice broke. "The girls disappeared at the beach. I took them for an outing and they vanished." Carmen's world collapsed. Her legs gave way and she clung to the doorframe. "Disappeared? What do you mean disappeared? How long ago?" 10 days ago. The police are searching, the fire department, the Coast Guard. Everyone is looking. 10 days, Carmen screamed, her voice echoing down the street. "My daughters have been missing for 10 days, and you didn't tell me?" Neighbors began to appear at their windows, drawn by the shouts. Carmen could barely process the information. Her 3 little daughters lost for over a week while she worked peacefully, thinking they were safe. "Why didn't you call me immediately? Why did you lie to me on the phone?" I didn't want to worry you until we were..." "Sure." Richard's excuse sounded false even to himself. "Didn't want to worry me?" Carmen advanced on him, her eyes blazing with fury and despair. "They are my daughters. I had the right to know." It was then she noticed something in Veronica's expression. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't worry. It was fear. And more than that, there was something that looked like relief. The police station had never seen a mother in such a desperate state as Carmen when she burst through the main door, still trembling with rage and despair. Detective Evans, who had been leading the investigation into the triplets' disappearance, stood up immediately upon seeing the distraught woman before him. "Please, I need to speak to whoever is investigating the disappearance of my daughters," Carmen shouted, her hands shaking as she pulled the girls' photos from her purse. "Ma'am, please calm down. I'm Detective Evans. Mr. Ashford told us about you." "He lied!" Carmen interrupted, slamming the photos on the desk. "He lied to you. He lied to me. He lied to everyone. My daughters have been missing for 10 days, and he only told me today." The detective frowned. This information didn't match what Richard had reported. According to him, Carmen had known since the first day but was too distraught to participate in the search. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I need you to tell me exactly what happened from the beginning." For 2 hours, Carmen recounted her version of events, how Richard had asked to take the girls for some special outings, how she had found his silence strange, how he had lied on the phone pretending the children were fine, and how she finally discovered the truth. "Detective, there is something very wrong with this whole story. Richard is hiding something, and that wife of his, Veronica, she didn't look sad. She looked relieved." The detective jotted down every word. His experience told him that stories, with so many inconsistencies, usually concealed truths far darker than they appeared. Meanwhile, in the small town near the beach where John lived, an extraordinary meeting was taking place in Old Joe's tavern. Word had spread quickly about the strange men who had threatened the fishermen, and the community was outraged. "It's not the first time men in suits have shown up here making threats," said Rosa, the local midwife, who had known every family in the area for 3 generations. Remember what happened to old man Tony last year? They wanted him to sell his land to build a resort. But this time is different, Manny interjected. John told me they were after children, 3 little girls he rescued from the sea. Children? Rosa stood up, alarmed. What children? Where did they come from? Manny recounted everything he knew. Storm's heroic rescue, how John had cared for the girls, and the threats from the mysterious men. The community listened in silence, absorbing every detail. These children might be running from something. Terrible, murmured Father Michael, the region's only clergyman. Perhaps domestic violence, perhaps something worse. Or perhaps, said Rosa, the local midwife, with the wisdom of someone who had seen much in her life, someone tried to get rid of them and has now discovered they failed. The suggestion sent a collective shudder through the room. The idea that someone could intentionally harm children was almost unthinkable, but not impossible. What do we do? Asked old Joe, nervously wiping a glass. We protect them, Rosa said with determination. If John decided to look after these girls, then we look after John. But how? We're fishermen, simple shopkeepers. Those men looked dangerous. Another local observed. It was then that a piece of news arrived that would change everything. Charlie, the only young person in the community with regular internet access, ran into the tavern with his phone in his hand. Everyone, I found something important, he yelled, out of breath. I searched online for missing children in the area, and I found this. On the small phone screen was a news article. Businessman desperately seeks missing triplets. The story included a photo of the 3 girls, the very same ones staying at John's cabin. Richard Ashford offers a $50,000 reward for information on his daughters Anna, Bea, and Clara, who disappeared 10 days ago during a trip to the beach. Rosa took the phone and studied the photo carefully. It's them. There's no doubt these are the girls with John. Then why did the men who went to his house look like thugs? Manny asked. If the father is looking for them, why didn't he come himself? And why, added Rosa, her voice heavy with suspicion, would 3 3-year-old girls be alone on a raft in the middle of the ocean? They can't swim. They can't navigate. How did they get there? The silence that followed was heavy. Everyone was thinking the same thing, but no one wanted to voice the terrible suspicion that was forming. Charlie, Father Michael said finally, can you find out more about this Richard Ashford, where he lives, his family situation? The young man typed quickly on his phone. After a few minutes, his face paled. Guys, look at this. On the screen was a recent wedding photo. Richard Ashford in an elegant suit beside a stunning blonde woman. The caption read, Businessman Richard Ashford marries model Veronica Santos in an intimate ceremony. The date is from 6 months ago, Charlie murmured. He remarried 6 months ago. And where is the girl's mother in all this? Rosa asked, her indignation growing. More searching revealed that Carmen Rodriguez, the triplets' mother, worked in a factory, hundreds of miles away. There was no mention of her in the news reports about the disappearance. My friends, Father Michael said, standing up solemnly, we are facing a situation that requires more than our protection. We need to contact the proper authorities. But what if we're wrong? Someone questioned. What if it really was an accident? Rosa slammed her fist on the table. Then why did his goons threaten John? Why didn't they come with the police? Why didn't they bring the children's mother? The logic was irrefutable. The community had reached the same terrible conclusion. Someone had tried to get rid of those 3 innocent girls and now wanted to finish the job. Charlie, said Manny, can you contact the police department that's handling the case? We need to tell them our side of the story. As the young man made the necessary calls, the rest of the community began organizing watch shifts at John's cabin. No one would sleep peacefully knowing that 3 innocent children were in danger. Detective. Evans's phone rang at 10 o'clock at night, interrupting his analysis of the inconsistencies in Richard Ashford's statement. On the other end of the line, the nervous voice of a young man identified himself as Charlie, a resident of a coastal town. Detective, I know it's late, but it's about the missing triplets. They're here, in our community. They're alive and safe. Evans almost dropped his coffee mug. What did you say? Repeat that. The 3 girls from the news, Anna, Bea, and Clara, they're being cared for by a local fisherman. He rescued them from the sea 10 days ago. Rescued from the sea. Explain to me exactly what happened. Charlie told the whole story. Storm the horse spotting the raft adrift, the heroic rescue, John's care, and most importantly, the threatening visit from the men in suits who wanted to recover the girls without involving the authorities. Detective, we in the community are convinced that someone tried to get rid of these children. A raft with 3 3-year-olds doesn't end up in the middle of the ocean by accident. Evans felt the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. Young, a man, I need you to keep the children safe until I get there. Don't let any strangers get close. I'll be there in the morning with a team. After hanging up, the detective immediately contacted Carmen, who was staying at a hotel near the station. Mrs. Rodriguez, I have news about your daughters. They are alive. Carmen's cry of relief and joy echoed through the phone. Alive? Where? How? Can I see them? We'll go get them first thing in the morning. But I must warn you, there are strong indications that their disappearance was not accidental. Your ex-partner may be involved. Carmen closed her eyes, feeling a mix of overwhelming relief and rising anger. I knew something was wrong. From the very first moment, I knew. The next morning, a small caravan of official vehicles drove down the dusty path to John's cabin. Detective Evans, Carmen, 2 social workers and a child psychologist prepared for one of the most delicate moments of their careers. In the cabin, John had prepared the girls for the visit. During the night, community members had taken turns standing guard, ensuring no intruders approached. Storm remained alert, sensing the tension in the air. Girls, John said gently, kneeling to their level, today you're going to have a very special visitor. Someone you know and who loves you very much. Who? Asked Anna, always curious. Your mommy. The silence that followed was broken by a collective shriek of joy. The 3 girls began to jump and laugh, hugging John and then Storm, as if wanting to share their happiness with their saviors. Is mommy really coming? Asked Bea, her little eyes shining with hope. Yes, my dear, she's on her way now. When the cars stopped in front of the cabin, Carmen got out before the vehicle had even come to a complete stop. Her legs trembled as she ran towards the door. John appeared first, and behind him, "Mommy!" The 3 screamed at once, running like little hurricanes toward their mother. The reunion was overwhelming. Carmen knelt in the sand and opened her arms, receiving her 3 daughters, who threw themselves at her with full force. Tears streamed down the faces of everyone present. Even Detective Evans, an experienced man who had seen many tragedies, discreetly wiped his eyes. My daughters, my babies, Carmen sobbed, kissing each little face, checking if they were okay, counting their fingers as she did when they were newborns. Mommy was so worried, so desperate. Mommy, Mr. John and Storm saved us. Anna recounted quickly. They're heroes. The horse swam in the sea to get us, added Clara, still clinging to her mother's neck. And Mr. John made yummy soup and taught us how to fish, completed Bea. Carmen stood up, still holding her 3 girls, and turned to John with tears in her eyes. How can I ever thank you for what you've done? You saved my daughters' lives. They saved mine too, John replied simply. For years, I didn't know what it was like to have a family. Storm approached the group, and the girls immediately ran to hug the horse. Mommy, this is Storm. He's our hero, exclaimed Anna. Carmen stroked the horse's muzzle, understanding that this extraordinary animal had been the instrument of a miracle. "Thank you, Storm. Thank you for saving my girls." Detective Evans approached discreetly. "Mrs. Rodriguez, we need to talk about what really happened. Can the girls tell us how they ended up at sea?" The triplets, still too young to fully understand the gravity of the situation, told their version with the brutal honesty of childhood. "Daddy made a raft and said we were going to play pirates. He pushed the raft into the water and left. He said pirates go on adventures by themselves," added B. "But then we got scared because we couldn't get back," completed Clara. Every word was a stab to Carmen's heart and a piece of evidence for the detective. The picture was clear. Richard had deliberately put his own daughters on a raft and sent them out to sea, knowing they had no way of surviving on their own. "Mr. Miller," said the detective, "you will be crucial to the investigation. Your testimony and the children's will be essential for justice." John nodded gravely. "I'll do whatever it takes. These girls deserve justice." Carmen hugged her daughters once more, knowing the nightmare was over, but that a battle for justice was now beginning. She looked at the simple cabin where her daughters had found safety and love, and at the white horse who had become the hero of a story that could have ended in tragedy. "Never again," she whispered. "You will never be in danger again." The police station had never seen such a commotion. News of the triplets' reunion with their mother and the imminent arrest of Richard Ashford had spread quickly through the city. Journalists, curious onlookers, and supporters crowded outside the building, awaiting developments in the case that had shocked the entire region. Inside the interrogation room, Richard sat with trembling hands, accompanied by his lawyer. His face, once proud and confident, now showed the signs of desperation of a man who had seen his world collapse. The evidence was piling up against him. The children's account, John's testimony about the rescue, the inconsistencies in his initial story, and most importantly, the discovery of the men he had hired to recover the girls. "Mr. Ashford," Detective Evans began, "we have statements that completely contradict your version of events. Would you like to tell us the truth about what happened at the beach?" Richard looked at his lawyer, who signaled for him to remain silent, but the weight of his guilt was becoming unbearable. I didn't want it to come to this." "Richard, don't say another word," the lawyer warned. "No!" Richard exploded, rising from his chair. "I can't lie anymore. I can't pretend anymore." The detective leaned forward. "Then tell us what really happened." "Veronica was pregnant," Richard began, his voice breaking. "She said she couldn't accept the girls into our new family. She said they were complications from the past, that I had to choose. And you chose. She threatened to leave, to take our baby. She said it would never be a real family as long as the triplets were around." Richard covered his face with his hands. I thought it would be quick, that they wouldn't suffer." The silence in the room was deafening. Even the lawyer seemed shocked by his client's confession. "Mr. Ashford, are you telling me that you deliberately abandoned your three-year-old daughters on a raft in the middle of the ocean?" "I was desperate. Veronica said she was going to leave, and I couldn't think straight. I thought it would be better for everyone." "Better for everyone? Your daughters almost died." I know," Richard yelled, tears streaming down his face. "I haven't been able to sleep or eat since that day. I see their little faces all the time, hear them calling me Daddy." Outside the room, Carmen listened to every word through the intercom system. Her hands were clenched into fists, anger competing with the relief of knowing her daughters were safe. The triplets were in a special room with the child psychologist, playing and not fully understanding the gravity of the situation. "And the men you sent after the children when you found out they had survived?" The detective continued. Veronica panicked when she saw the news on television. She said if the girls came back, everything would be discovered. I hired those men to bring them back. To do what? With them? Richard couldn't answer. The implication was too clear, too terrible to verbalize. Just then, the door opened and Carmen entered the room, accompanied by another officer. Her face was pale, but her eyes shone with a steely determination. "Carmen," Richard whispered, seeing the woman he had once loved, the mother of his children, whom he had betrayed in the most terrible way possible. "Look at me, Richard," she said, her voice controlled but filled with emotion. "Look me in the eyes and explain to me how you could do this to your own daughters. I don't know. I don't know how I got to this point. They called you Daddy. They ran to you when you came home. Anna always showed you the pictures she drew. Bee would save flowers to give you. Clara would sing those little songs she made up just for you." Carmen approached the table. "How could you look at them and decide they were better off dead?" "Carmen, please, no!" Her voice echoed through the room. "You have no right to ask for anything. You tried to kill our daughters because of a woman who doesn't even truly care about you." As if the universe had conspired to prove Carmen's point, the door opened again. Veronica was escorted in by 2 officers, handcuffed, and her face contorted with rage. "You idiot!" she screamed at Richard. "You had to confess. You had to ruin everything." The contrast was stark. Carmen, devastated but dignified, fighting for her daughters. Veronica, furious only at being caught. "Veronica," Richard tried, but she cut him off. "Don't give me that sorry face now. You knew exactly what you were doing when you put those kids on that raft." Veronica's confession sealed both their fates. Detective Evans had witnessed many crimes in his career, but never something so coldly calculated against innocent children. "Richard Ashford and Veronica Santos," he said formally, "you are under arrest for attempted murder, felony child abandonment, and conspiracy." As the 2 were led away in handcuffs, Carmen remained in the room, trembling with the magnitude of what she had discovered. The man she had loved, the father of her children, had tried to kill them for financial gain and the pressure of an ambitious woman. "Mrs. Rodriguez," the detective said gently, "your daughters are completely safe now, and thanks to the heroism of Mr. Miller and Storm, they don't even fully grasp what they've been through." "They'll understand when they're older," Carmen murmured. "How will I explain that their own father tried to—" "You'll explain that there are bad people in the world, but there are also good people like Mr. Miller and the community that protected them. You will teach them that true love always wins." Carmen nodded, wiping away her tears. Her daughters were alive, they were safe, and now she knew they would never be in danger again. Justice had been served, and the truth, however painful, had finally come to light. 3 weeks after Richard and Veronica's arrest, Carmen stood in John's cabin, watching her daughters play in the sand with Storm. The horse had become more than a hero to the girls. He was their daily adventure companion, their silent confidant, and their tireless protector. "Mommy, look, Storm is teaching me to be brave like him," shouted Anna, sitting on the horse as he walked calmly along the beach. "He's very smart," said Bee, stroking the animal's mane. "He knew we were in danger before anyone else did." Clara, always the quietest, whispered secrets into Storm's ear, and he would lower his head as if he were truly listening to every word. Carmen smiled, but her eyes showed the worry that had been consuming her for days. She had made a decision that would change their lives forever, but she still didn't know how to tell the girls. "John," she said, approaching the fisherman who was mending his nets, "I need to talk to you about something important." "Of course, Carmen. What is it?" I've decided to stay here, in town, permanently." John looked up, surprised. "Stay? But your job, your life in the city?" "My life is where my daughters are safe and happy," Carmen replied firmly. and I've never seen them as happy as they are here, with you and with Storm." It was true. Since arriving in the small town, the triplets had blossomed in a way Carmen had never seen before. They woke up eager to see the horse, helped John with small chores, played freely on the beach, and at night they would snuggle in the cabin, recounting stories of their daily adventures. "But Carmen, you can't just abandon your life for our sake. It's not for your sake, John, it's for them, and for me too." Carmen sat on the sand beside him. "I worked for years in a factory that barely paid me enough to survive, far from my daughters, missing every important moment of their childhood. Richard promised to take good care of them when I wasn't around, and look how that turned out." John watched the girls chase the waves, their laughter echoing on the sea breeze. "And what do you plan to do here? This is a simple place, Carmen. There aren't many job opportunities. Rosa offered me a job working with her as a midwife and nurse's aide. She said she's always needed help, but never had someone she could completely trust." Carmen smiled. "And Manny wants me to help at the general store, especially with the bookkeeping. He says he's never been good with numbers. And the girls, school, doctors, all that? I've already spoken with Father Michael. He can teach them. Read their letters. And there's a school in the next town for when they're older. As for doctors, Rosa knows trusted professionals who serve the area." John was silent for a moment, processing the information. The truth was, the idea of Carmen and the girls staying permanently filled him with a joy he hadn't felt in years. But it also worried him. Had she really thought through all the implications? And where would you live? "Well," Carmen blushed slightly, "I was thinking maybe we could build an addition to your cabin. I'd pay for the materials, of course, and help with all the expenses. The girls love it here, and you. I trust you, John, completely. You saved my daughters. When I wasn't there to protect them, you cared for them as if they were your own granddaughters. I can never repay that, but I can make sure they grow up near you." Tears welled up in John's eyes. For decades he had lived alone, accepting solitude as his permanent companion. Now, the possibility of having a family, even if not by blood, seemed almost too good to be true. "Carmen, it would be an honor to have you here, but are you sure? Life here is very different from the city." "I'm absolutely sure. In fact, I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Just then, Anna came running up, followed by her sisters. Mommy, Mr. John said he can teach us how to swim, but only when you're a little older," John added quickly, seeing the look of panic on Carmen's face. "And he said we can help with the real fishing," exclaimed Bea. "And that Storm can be our horse forever," completed Clara, hugging John's legs. Carmen looked at her 3 daughters, seeing the light in their eyes, the genuine joy in their voices. "Girls, how would you feel if I said we were going to live here forever, that this would be our new home?" The silence that followed lasted only 2 seconds before it erupted into shouts of joy. The 3 girls jumped, danced, hugged their mother, hugged John, and ran to tell the news to Storm. "I think they approve of the idea," John said, laughing. "I think so," Carmen agreed, watching her daughters celebrate with the horse, who seemed to understand the importance of the moment. That night, as the girls slept soundly in their improvised beds, Carmen and John sat on the cabin's porch, planning the future. The house extension, the children's routine, Carmen's jobs, everything was discussed in detail. "John," Carmen said, "before turning in, thank you for everything, for saving my daughters, for caring for them, for giving us a second chance at being a family." "Carmen," he replied, "thank you for giving me a second chance at having a purpose in life." Storm, as always, stood guard near the door, ensuring his human family slept safely. The horse knew, with the wisdom of animals, that something important had happened that day. His family was complete now, and he would be their guardian forever. 6 months later, The beach that had once been the stage for a heinous crime now echoed with pure, joyful laughter. John's cabin had transformed into a true home, with a cozy extension where Carmen and the girls lived. Colorful flowers planted by Anna beautified the entrance, while a small vegetable garden tended by Bee provided fresh produce for the family. Clara had created a special corner where she kept beautiful shells and stones she found on the beach, her own little treasure. Trove! Grandpa John, look what I caught! Shouted Anna, running across the sand with a tiny fish in her hands. The girls had naturally started calling John Grandpa, and he had never felt so honored by a title. Well done, my little mermaid. You're burst fish all by yourself, said John, examining the catch with genuine pride. Your mother will be so proud. Bee and Clara soon joined them, each bringing their own accomplishments of the day. The simple life on the beach had taught the triplets values that no formal school could: patience, respect for nature, the importance of teamwork, and above all, the value of a united family. Carmen emerged from the cabin, where she had spent the morning helping Rosa with a complicated birth in town. Her face showed exhaustion, but also a deep satisfaction she had never experienced in her years at the factory. How was my little fisherwomen's day? She asked, kissing each of her daughters. Mommy, we fished, helped Grandpa John fix the net, and Storm taught us how to find special shells. Bee recounted quickly. Storm approached upon hearing his name, allowing Clara to lean on his neck as she always did when she wanted to tell him something important. Mommy, today I dreamed about the daddy from before, she said softly. The comment made everyone pause. The girls rarely mentioned Richard, and when they did, Carmen and John were always alert to handle any trauma that might surface. And what happened in your dream, my dear? Carmen asked, kneeling to her daughter's level. I told him that I have a real family now, that Grandpa John takes care of us, that Storm protects us, and that Mommy is always here. Clara stroked the horse's mane, and I told him I don't need him anymore because I know what real love is. The girl's words deeply touched everyone present. John discreetly wiped away a tear, impressed by the precocious wisdom of this child who had faced so much in so little time. And what did Daddy say in the dream? Asked Anna, always curious. He cried and said he was happy we were safe, Clara replied simply. Carmen hugged her daughter, understanding that the dream represented some kind of emotional closure for Clara. The children had processed the trauma in their own way, finding healing in the unconditional love they received every day. Do you know what makes me happiest? Carmen said, gathering her three daughters in a group hug. It's knowing that you understand that family isn't about who you share blood with, but about who chooses to love and protect you every day. Like Grandpa John and Storm, exclaimed Anna. Exactly like them, Carmen agreed, extending her arm to include John in the hug. The fisherman joined the group, his heart overflowing with gratitude. He had spent years believing his useful life had ended when he lost his wife. Now he was discovering that love has no age limit, and that sometimes the family we choose is stronger than the one we are born into. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with golden and rosy hues, the family sat on the sand to watch the daily spectacle that nature offered. Storm lay down beside them, his presence as comforting as ever. Grandpa John, said Bee thoughtfully, when we grow up, are we still going to live here? If you want to, this will always be your home, he promised. No matter where life takes, you will always have a home here. And will Storm live forever? Asked Clara, worried about her favorite hero. Horses live a long time, my little one. And even when Storm gets old, he will always be remembered as the hero who saved 3 princesses from the sea, John explained. Anna stood up and ran to the water's edge, where small waves lapped at the sand. Look, the sea is calm today. It looks like it's happy too. It was true. The ocean that had once been a scene of despair now reflected peace and serenity, as if nature itself was celebrating the victory of love over evil. Months later, news arrived that Richard had been sentenced to 15 years in prison, while Veronica received 10. But this information came like distant echoes from a past life that no longer mattered to Carmen and the girls. What mattered was the present. Anna developing her talent for fishing, Bay learning about medicinal plants from Rosa, and Clara creating the most beautiful songs about the sea and white horses. Carmen had found her calling, helping to bring new lives into the world, while John had discovered that it's never too late to be a grandfather. And Storm, the white horse, remained the family's silent guardian, always alert, always protective, always reminding everyone that true heroes sometimes come in the most unexpected forms. When night fell completely on the beach and the stars began to twinkle in the infinite sky, the family retreated to the cabin. The girls nestled into their beds, whispering stories to each other, while Carmen and John made plans for the next day. Outside, Storm took his usual position, standing guard over those he had learned to love. The night wind carried the scent of salt and the gentle sound of the waves, an eternal lullaby that cradled the dreams of a family that had found happiness in the most unlikely of places. Because sometimes, when life confronts us with its cruelest face, it is unexpected love, the kindness of strangers, and the courage of pure hearts that show us there is always hope, and that every storm, no matter how violent, eventually gives way to the sun.